A charitable organization is a type of non-profit organization. It differs from other types of NPOs in that it centers on philanthropic goals as well as social well-being. The legal definition of charitable organization varies according to the country and in some instances the region of the country in which the charitable organization operates. The regulation, tax treatment, and the way in which charity law affects charitable organizations also varies. Financial figures are important indicators to assess the financial sustainability of a charity, especially to charity evaluators. This information can impact a charity's reputation with donors and societies, and thus the charity's financial gains. Charitable organizations often depend partly on donations from for-profit organizations. Such donations to charitable organizations represent a major form of corporate philanthropy. History. Until the mid-18th century, charity was mainly distributed through parish relief, churches, almshouses and bequests from the rich. Charities were also responsible for education, health, housing and even prisons. Almshouses were established throughout Europe in the early Middle Ages to provide a place of residence for poor, old and distressed people. The first recorded almshouse was founded in York by King Athelstan in the 10th century. Enlightenment charity. It was in the Enlightenment era that charitable and philanthropic activity among voluntary associations and rich benefactors became a widespread cultural practice. Societies, gentlemen's clubs, and mutual associations began to flourish in England, and the upper classes increasingly adopted a philanthropic attitude toward the disadvantaged. This new social activism was channeled into the establishment of charitable organizations. These proliferated from the middle of the century. This emerging upper-class fashion for benevolence resulted in the incorporation of the first charitable organizations. Captain Thomas Coram, appalled by the number of abandoned children living on the streets of London, set up the Foundling Hospital in 1741 to look after these unwanted orphans in Lamb's Conduit Fields, Bloomsbury. This was the first such charity in the world and served as the precedent for incorporated associational charities everywhere. Jonas Hanway, another notable philanthropist of the era, established the Marine Society in 1756 as the first seafarers' charity, in a bid to aid the recruitment of men to the Navy. By 1763, the society had recruited over 10,000 men, and it was incorporated by an Act of Parliament in 1772. Hanway was also instrumental in establishing the Magdalen Hospital to rehabilitate prostitutes. These organizations were funded by subscription and run as voluntary associations. They raised public awareness of their activities through the emerging popular press and were generally held in high social regard. Some charities received state recognition in the form of the Royal Charter. Charities also began to adopt campaigning roles, where they would champion a cause and lobby the government for legislative change. This included organized campaigns against the ill treatment of animals and children and the campaign that eventually succeeded in ending the slave trade throughout the British Empire at the turn of the 19th century and within its considerable sphere of influence. The process was, however, a lengthy one, being finally concluded when Saudi Arabia abolished slavery in 1962. This period also saw growing philosophical debate between those who championed state intervention and those who believed that private charities should provide welfare. Thomas Malthus, the political economist, criticized poor relief for paupers on economic and moral grounds and proposed leaving charity entirely to the private sector. His views were very influential and informed the Victorian laissez-faire attitude towards state intervention for the poor. Growth during 19th century. During the 19th century, a profusion of charitable organizations were set up to alleviate the awful conditions of the working class in the slums. The Labourers' Friend Society, chaired by Lord Shaftesbury in the United Kingdom in 1830, was set up to improve working class conditions. This included the promotion of allotment of land to labourers for cottage husbandry that later became the allotment movement. In 1844 it became the first model dwellings company, organizations that sought to improve the housing conditions of the working classes by building new homes for them, at the same time receiving a competitive rate of return on any investment. This was one of the first housing associations, a philanthropic endeavor that flourished in the second half of the 19th century, brought about by the growth of the middle class. Later associations included the Peabody Trust and the Guinness Trust. The principle of philanthropic intention with capitalist return was given the label 5% philanthropy. There was strong growth in municipal charities. The Brougham Commission led on to the Municipal Corporations Act 1835, which reorganized local charities by incorporating them into one entity under supervision from the local government. Charities at the time, including the Charity Organization Society, tended to discriminate between the deserving poor, who would be provided with suitable relief, and the underserving or improvident poor, who were regarded as the cause of the woes through their idleness. They also tended to be against the state provision of welfare, due to its perceived demoralizing effect. Although minimal state involvement was the dominant philosophy of the period, there was still significant government involvement in the shape of statutory regulation and even limited funding. Philanthropy became a very fashionable activity among the expanding middle classes in Britain and America. Octavia Hill and John Ruskin were an important force behind the development of social housing, and Andrew Carnegie exemplified the large-scale philanthropy of the newly rich in industrialized America. In Gospel of Wealth, Carnegie wrote about the responsibilities of great wealth and the importance of social justice. He established public libraries throughout the English-speaking countries, as well as contributing large sums to schools and universities. It was only towards the end of the century, with the advent of the new liberalism and the innovative work of Charles Booth on documenting working class life in London, that attitudes towards poverty began to change, which led to the first social liberal welfare reforms, including old age pensions and free school meals. During the 20th century, charitable organizations such as Oxfam greatly expanded, becoming large multinational, non-governmental organizations with very large budgets.